Welcome to another Telltale Books video. I'm Greg, and I'm going to be continuing with my J.G. Ballard series with this video. Moving on to his 23rd published work, a short work that was later expanded into a whole novel, titled The Drowned World. The short version is also titled The Drowned World. It appeared in January 1962 in Science Fiction Adventures number 24 for, of course, January 1962. This is the actual magazine. I did find a PDF online. But otherwise, the only place that the short version of The Drowned World can be found is this issue of Science Fiction Adventures. It has not been collected into his complete short stories because it isn't really a short story. It's classified as a novella. And even though it is a short work, the fact that it was expanded into the novel gets reprinted all the time. Unlike Wind from Nowhere, The Drowned World does get reprinted a lot. It's part of the Science Fiction Master Works collection by Ballard. And so that's the version that stays in print. The short version has only ever been published in Science Fiction Adventures. So, of course, being the Ballard completist that I am, I had to get a hold of a copy of that magazine and read the story. And I did. First of all, a word about the artwork, because I love illustration and graphic design. The illustration here is an excellent illustration, and I will put it up bigger on screen. This is an excellent illustration by Brian Lewis, who was one of the premier science fiction illustrators in England in the 1950s and 1960s. Brian Lewis did a lot of work for New Worlds, a lot of work for science fantasy, of course, work for Science Fiction Adventures. This is a British magazine. This is not an American magazine. So, excellent illustration. I really like it. But when I started reading this story, and I do see how Brian Lewis's illustration accurately is portraying the story. But there's a lot that Ballard puts into the story that isn't captured by Lewis's illustration. Before I read the story, I thought it was just showing a scene of some luxury hotel on a lake or on the ocean, in Cannes or something like that. Because you see this fancy yacht out front and this big building that looks like something IBM might have built. It doesn't look like a world that has suffered a catastrophe. But that is what happens in the drowned world. Literally, the world drowns. The sun becomes more active and is putting out more heat and some very large solar flares, way bigger than the ones we've actually seen lately that have produced a lot of pretty auroras in the sky. These are big enough and hot enough to raise the Earth's temperature considerably, with the equatorial regions going up to 140 degrees and melting all the ice everywhere. So Ballard, I think, exaggerates how much that would affect the world to have the polar caps melting. I mean, we know that coastal regions would be flooded, but he has mountain ranges underwater. He's got all his inland cities underwater. Everything's underwater. And with the rise in temperature, of course, tropical plants flourish. Tropical insects and animals also flourish. Alligators are everywhere in big packs, attacking people. Mosquitoes are huge and are attacking people. But this isn't an action novel. This isn't like Murray Leinster's um, story about giant insects that I reviewed a while ago. For some reason, the name won't even pop into my head. I think it's right behind me. The Forgotten Planet. This isn't like that. This story is it. It kind of does what he did with the novel version of The Wind from Nowhere, scaled down from the epic level to focus in on the lives of three people. You have a guy, you have this woman, you have a guy and um, some military people who are going around trying to evacuate people because the area where it's too hot to live is expanding north and south from the equator. They're trying to get people out of those regions to areas where they can survive. And this one woman doesn't really want to leave. She wants to stay, even though it's certain death to stay there. So they're trying to convince her to leave. And that's the focus of the story. Ballard wrote this in a way that, without having read the novel length Drowned World yet, I feel like I've read an excerpt from the novel. It doesn't feel complete. I don't get a sense of resolution at the end. The story doesn't seem to go anywhere. There's um, no finality to the end of the story. But through this story, for the duration of this, you get beautiful descriptions of this world, evoking the surrealistic work of Paul Delvaux and Max Ernst by name. It's not just me saying that it feels that way. He actually does talk about the paintings of those artists and compare it to the landscape of this drowned world. And so he was strongly influenced by surrealism in writing this story, and he does a really amazing job of creating that sense, creating that description, as well as, like I say, beyond what this cover illustration shows you, um, creates the sense of how the world has changed and how the world is, how the human world anyway, is being destroyed by this catastrophe. This is a world that has been through a catastrophe. And you really get a sense of that the way Ballard describes it. So even though he is narrowly focused on a handful of characters, you still do get the world building. You still do get a sense of what the world is like, because the whole world is pretty much the same as the environment that the characters are in right now. So you don't have that problem that I had with The Wind from Nowhere, which I feel in the novel The Wind from Nowhere, he doesn't do as good a job describing the worldwide catastrophe because he's too focused in on the lives of a small number of characters. Where Stormwind was more epic, he built the whole world a lot better. Um, the Drowned World escapes it does basically the same thing that The Wind from Nowhere did, focusing on small number of lives, but he escapes that problem of not building the whole world around them. He does a good job of solving that and making this a more interesting story that way. It's just like I say, I enjoyed this story. I liked reading it, but it it felt like an excerpt. It felt like it wasn't finished. And it very well may have been. I mean, the novel of The Drowned World was published, I believe, in August of 1962. This short version was published in January of 62. He very likely was in the midst of writing the novel and decided to take part of the novel out and publish it as a short version in Science Fiction Adventures, either for the money or to test the waters, so to speak. Sorry for the pun. Um, I definitely recommend it to the Ballard completist. For everyone else, I think you would be much further ahead skipping the short version, going to the novel for the two reasons I say. Number one, the short version feels incomplete. Number two, it's a whole lot easier to get a copy of the novel than it is to get a copy of the novella. So if you're going to read it, get the novel, I think, and I'll be reading and reporting on that shortly. I think in December is when I'll finally get to it. I got a few other Ballard stories to get through before I reach the Drowned World in his bibliography going in order of publication. But I do believe I'll get to that novel yet this year. So, have you read the short version of The Drowned World? Don't spoil anything about the novel if you've read it. Don't spoil anything about too many details of the short story, but let me know what you think. Let me know if you think this was a brilliant piece of Ballardian fiction, or if you think it is an unfinished snippet of something bigger. And hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Come on back for a lot more Ballard and other authors. The next Ballard is going to be The Insane Ones, which was also published in January of 1962. It was a busy month. The Wind from Nowhere came out in book publication. The Drowned World was in Science Fiction Adventures, and The Insane Ones was in Amazing Stories here in the United States. So I hope you'll come back and join me for that and all the others coming at you really soon.